welcome back to another Strategoi video. Ryan here, on my own again because, well, doing all these videos has taken its toll on Jonas, his voice, and so hopefully he's not getting sick. But seeing as Nurgle is neither one of our official armies, I'm just going to keep the passing on the torch here until he's feeling well enough to get back on the work that we're doing, trying to cover every one of these factions as the faction focuses come out. We're trying to get it within a couple days, especially on the ones that are right before the weekend. Then we get busier, of course, but thus far we're keeping up the pace. So hopefully you guys are enjoying it. And we're not going to be able to keep this pace up for a long time. Obviously, once this is done, we're going to ease back into hopefully a video, maybe 2 a week if we can. The fourth edition has definitely reinvigorated something for us in our passion for the game. And even though there's all the armies are getting toned down a bit, and some might be more disappointing than others, it should go without saying, but I'll keep reiterating it here anyway, that we're actually really excited about fourth edition, and hope you guys are too. So even if we see something as a nerf, just keep on plowing. We don't have all of the information. And, we'll know soon enough. Within a month's time or so, we probably will have those indexes, I think. So let's just keep staying positive where applicable. Anyway, before I forget, guys, if you could hit like, share, and subscribe. Share the video, really, is kind of the biggest thing to kind of get more voices out there. There aren't that many channels that are covering every single one of these faction focuses. And even though it functions more as like a news article at the end of the day, or kind of a news report, we're going to try to do as many of the army books themselves as possible as well, the indexes. So let's just keep the vibe going here. It always encourages us to see that you guys want to see more of what we got to say, hear more of what we got to say rather. And we're just a couple voices out there. We certainly don't know everything that's going on, but we really appreciate you guys for sticking around and wanting to spend some time with us and our opinions on this stuff. Okay, so here we are. Speaking of factions that I think had somewhat unimpressive showings in the faction focuses thus far, we've got Nurgle today, Maggotkin of Nurgle. I'm going to probably say a lot of things that I felt about Ideneth, really, except one big thing that I'll go ahead and just throw out as kind of my thesis, if you will, for this army is whereas Ideneth kind of has been languishing in the meta a bit and hasn't really had the right kind of tools to deal with all the rock, paper, scissors that's been getting increasingly worse in the kind of arms race we've seen with 3rd edition, especially later phase 3rd edition. Nurgle's seemed, to keep up relatively well. It's had its dips. It was very strong when its new book came out at the beginning of 3rd edition. Then it kind of disappeared for a while. And then people have managed to bring it back with all the Sloppity Bilepiper stuff mixed with Glotkin shenanigans. And, it's managed to be a solid army despite the fact that on the surface of things, it doesn't have a whole lot going for it besides the obvious things like being tanky and, having a really flavorful rule set. So my contrast here would be, despite the fact that I feel like today's reveals are very similar and similarly underwhelming as it was the Ideneth reveals were for me yesterday. Nurgle always seems to be the kind of army that's more than the sum of its parts or more than what it looks like on a piece of paper. And so I have a feeling it's going to continue to perform well despite whatever we might see today. So keep that in mind. Okay, let's scroll down. So lore stuff. Battle traits. They really reduced. Gosh, we were talking about ogres, and ogres players were frustrated that there was this much blank space on their battle traits page. But look at what Nurgle's got going on too. Everything that we see here revolves around the diseased system. Kind of like most of what we saw for Tzeentch revolved around their similar version, which was the I forget what exactly it was called, but in Flame's Weird Flame rule. One of the things that's not here, you'd expect to see a few things here. Summoning we know is going away, but we don't see any mention of it in this article as far as I noticed reading through kind of browsing through the headlines here. I wouldn't be surprised if they have a summoning mechanic or something like what Tzeentch is getting, where they can bring some units back. But they didn't mention anything, so I guess it's not necessarily a big part of the army's build. Something else that's missing that was flavorful, maybe not popular because it was not necessarily something that defined how the army actually felt every game, but it was the cycle of corruption, where I think there were 7 different locations it could be, and then you determined one that was within a few of those, and then every battle round would move to the next one, kind of like a tides, the Idoneth tides, but a little more random, or a lot more random. That seems to be totally gone. That said, I wouldn't be surprised if it's on a warscroll somewhere. And then the 5-up ward that the whole army has, just like we've seen with the Death armies, has just gotten moved onto warscrolls, so don't worry about that one. The Locus of Fecundity is a healing mechanic that isn't on these battle traits here. But I think we're going to see with the Unlimited spell that it kind of found its way back in a certain kind of sense. So let's take a look at the disease stuff, though, while we're here. Probably the best place to start would be here. This is where we're going to give the disease keyword out. So we see it's a once per turn army at the end of any turn. So this could be your turn or your opponent's turn. So 10 times per game. Now that said, for it to have any meaningful effect, especially from the beginning, you're going to need to be alphaing, which you probably aren't. But you'll see that you pick one of these following effects, and the infect is kind of where everything starts. Kind of ground zero, if you will, for the disease. But so you pick an enemy unit that's in combat with a friendly Maggotkin of Nurgle unit, and then it gets the disease keyword. Nothing happens after that, or at least as far as this one part of the rule would seem to suggest. We have then the disease can spread. So you could have picked in a different turn. You can pick a diseased enemy unit to be the target, and each other enemy unit within that target's combat range has the disease keyword. So it spreads to other units, friendly units of that diseased unit that are basically in combat with it. Not that it's in combat, but 3 inches. So, and then the last step is if all the enemy units on the battlefield have the disease keyword, inflict 1 mortal damage on each of them. Well, this one is going to be very easy to turn off for a number of armies, because there's definitely armies that want a hero to sit back and not be involved in combat, or have like some unit that can teleport or something that's sitting back towards the end of the backfield and just stays out of the whole fray as long as possible. So I don't expect to see the mutate going off too much. And if you only read this word, you would think, this one rule, you'd think the disease keyword is not actually that handy, but it gets better. But basically, as far as spread, the second ability is concerned here. Obviously, this goes a long way to getting all those units on the battlefield diseased. But at the same time, the opponent can just kind of choose not to have their units near the other units, right? The diseased units. That said, it seems like a lot of heroes that are power pairing their way through supporting their similar units need to be within 3 inches now. That's not universally true, but we have seen enough rules that seem to suggest that. So it's going to be choosing between those two things. And then obviously handing out disease is handing out disease. So, maybe you'll get some extra mortal wounds off, but most likely I wouldn't count on that. I think that's only in specific circumstances. Now, let's shift over to the right-hand side here. Also a once per turn army, and also end of any turn. Now, obviously, you can choose which one of these goes off first, but there's no reason that you would choose to have this one go off after the one on the right, unless the only thing you're going to do is this disease keyword thing. And this is the one that does the real damage. It's roll a d3 for each diseased enemy unit. On a 2+ inflicted amount of mortal damage on that unit equal to the roll. Now, keep in mind, this is every single turn that you're going to be getting this off and being able to spread the disease. So now the way it used to work was, anyone that's played Nurgle is intimately familiar with this, I think, but at the end of either the movement phase or the combat phase, if an enemy unit was standing within 3 inches of a Maggotkin of Nurgle unit, they received a disease point, and they also got disease points by anytime they were being shot at or attacked with a missile or melee weapon, respectively, by a Nurgle unit that rolled a 6 to hit. Then it added a disease point onto them, up to a maximum of 7. And so at the end of the turn in the battle shock, start of the battle shock actually, you'd roll a number of dice equal to how many disease points you had on you, and every 4 plus, normally that you could boost this a bit, would do a mortal wound. So obviously you're talking about 3.5 on average if they had the max of 7 points on them, and then they got reset to 1, which meant you were always going to have to keep rolling this until you healed, which brings us back to this ability, but we'll get there in a second. Now you could choose to heal that wound, or not the wounds, obviously you could do that too, but if you had some flexibility with healing, let's say you could heal 2 wounds, you could take the 1 disease point off, or however many you want, but let's say you've gotten down to just 1, you could take that off into the point where you're not diseased anymore, and then you could use the other point to heal a wound if you needed. Well, that's no longer the way this healing works, because kind of like what we saw with the Weird Flame for Tzeentch, if you have that disease keyword, and you would try to heal or return slain models to that unit, you have to get rid of the disease keyword first. And so even if you were to heal like 6 wounds, that whole ability gets transferred into, just focused into just getting rid of the disease. And then the next time you try to heal or return models to it, you could, actually do that. So it's kind of a turning that ability off for a while. And if the Nurgle can keep staying in combat with you or still doling these points out, then it's going to be a problem. You're basically never going to heal. So that's a buff for sure for the Nurgle player. And then we look at, like, we compare like every turn rolling a max of 7 dice and then doing around 3.5 damage. What are we seeing now? Well, we're seeing this same ability that we're pretty sure is going to work, that if it's a 2 plus on a D3, so a 3 plus on a D6, it's going to do either 3-4, which would be 2 mortal damage, or 5-6, which would be 3 mortal damage. So that's putting us up to 0. There's a 1/3 chance you do 0, which is way higher than what it used to be back when the old rules, when the chance that you would say you had 7 points on it, you would fail 7 4-ups is extremely small, whereas the chance that you would fail just on this one roll is 1/3. So that's pretty rough, but it's doing an average of, well, not average, but it's doing, if it goes off, it's doing 2 or 3. So, that's a little bit under what we're expecting it to do, but I think the fact that it's harder to get rid of those diseases, it might be a thing, that maybe it spreads a little more easily could be a thing. And then if we fast forward over here to this first faction or formation, if you choose this one, starting from the second battle round onwards, add 1 to the amount of mortal damage inflicted, if any, by the Racked with Disease ability. So that would be the one that does the D3 mortal wounds if you roll a 2-up on a D3, or it does that many mortal wounds, I should say. So that means instead of being 2 to 3, it's doing 3 to 4, but it could also still fail. And that's a question of legalese, but I think what they mean when they say if any is if some amount goes off, then you do some. It's not saying add 1 to even 0. I'm pretty sure that's the way that's going to be ruled. But I could see someone interpreting this as, well, it's 0 and then you add 1. I'm pretty sure it only increases if it goes off, not if it fails. But anyway, so 3 to 4 is starting to obviously literally mathematically approach what it used to do, assuming you could get someone up to 7. Now, there's a decent point to be had that getting someone to 7 wasn't guaranteed. Like you'd have to have enough weight of dice to roll some 6s to add to it, and then you'd get 1 in move and in combat. So you're on average getting 2 freebies for standing within 3 inches of any friendly Maggotkin of Nurgle units. So on average, that was, of course, with a 4-up roll with 2 dice, only 1 wound. So the base rule, just by standing around the guys, was doing less work than it now does, and you were really relying on the combat attacks. So that has definitely changed. Overall, I think this is a side grade, if not better. It depends on how all the other rules that we're going to see on War Scrolls and maybe some spells ends up interacting with those rules. But I definitely think that faction seems pretty good, just as a default setting. Like if nothing else speaks to you, then this looks pretty good. They also mentioned that some of the other formations are going to be Nurglite mortals that explode on death. We could see how that is. Maybe it gives disease points as well. one for the droning Rotfly Cavalry. So that I'm hoping that's for both the demon and mortal versions of the flies, which is my favorite part of the army because I like cavalry, even though they're slow and they fly. I think that's flavorful. I like those models. And then we've got a menagerie of horrid horticulturists, which plant feculent gnarl moths to usher Nurgle's garden. I have a feeling that the gnarl moths, they've always been able to you've always been able to have more than one on the field. But it sounds like they're going to be a little bit more like gnawholes or the Sylvaneth trees from the way at least this subfaction or formation sounds. Okay, so let's move on to their spell lore, their unlimited spell. We don't know if any armies have more than one unlimited spell in one lore, but I think it's going to be pretty common that they have at least one unlimited spell since there's only 3 spells usually in a lore, and that means if you take too many wizards or they have too many casts available, especially if they have no warscroll spells, that they're going to run out of options. So I think we're going to see a lot of this, but goes off on a 7. You pick a Maggotkin of Nurgle wizard. Obviously, you pick a unit holier than 12, and then if the unit is damaged, it's a binary spell. So if the unit is already damaged, you heal D3. So this is kind of what I was talking about, that you used to have the Locus of Fecundity that could heal like some of the bigger guys. And this is kind of doing a similar thing. Of course, you have to use one of your casts to do it, but you can do as many times as you have casts with casters, I should say. And you could be healing some priority targets. And then if the target is not damaged, you subtract 1 from wound rolls for attacks that target the unit until you start your next turn. So that's including shooting. I always like to say that because the default is in melee, but if it doesn't say specifically in combat or melee, then it means including shooting usually. So I think that's pretty good. This spell used to be a demon spell lore spell. It lost 2 inches of range, but was just visible. It was just within range, not wholly thin. So it's got even tighter than it looks. And it added one to the wounds characteristic of that unit until your next hero phase. It was also only for demons, so it got more generic. And adding 1 to the wounds roll was confusing. I think we're going to see. Adding 1 to the wounds characteristic. I think the Lareth units had a spell that did something like that in Lumineth, and then this army, and those might be the only 2 armies that had that. Maybe, yeah, where they only temporarily gain a point of wounds characteristic, but then when it falls off, it could result in this weird bookkeeping thing where you have to keep track of how many wounds it was supposed to have, and then maybe it's dead after all, and blah blah blah. So. Anyway, I don't mind seeing that rule gone, but it is what it is. This seems pretty strong too. Okay, so let's move on to some units. So we've got our greater demon here, and right now we've only seen one of the other 4 major Chaos God armies in these faction focuses. That would be Tzeentch, and instead of seeing the generic greater demon for that army, which would be the Lord of Change, we saw Kairos, the named version. In every single one of the 4 main Chaos Gods, there is a named and unnamed version of these. So for Maggotkin of Nurgle, we've got the Great Unclean One as the base one, and then we have Rotigus. Now, I'm really hoping they really make the named versions feel like they're worth being special. But now we get to see what a kind of generic one of these guys looks like. Some pluses here is we got 2 extra inches of move. I was hoping when I saw this that the other Nurgle units would get a little faster too. That would have changed some things in a big way, but that doesn't seem to be the case. This guy also got +2 health, so he's really tanky with this health plus a 4-up save plus a 5+ ward. He also, while I'm here, remained a 2-level wizard, and now we can see that the greater demons are not by default war masters. I guess Rotigus will be, but not the regular greater demons. All right, so let's look at the attack profile, the profiles we've got here. So the ranged weapon is basically just as good as it used to be, except it lost a point of rend, and the attacks characteristic got better to make up for it. It used to be D6 attacks, which can spike to a 6, but this on average is 2 for the D3 plus 3, so that's 5. So on average, this is 5, which is 1.5 more than what an average D6 is. And from the lowest to highest of a D6, you had 1 to 6, whereas the lowest to highest on this is 4. but caps out on 6. So I would take this any day, every day. So this is definitely buffed, even though the rend kind of fell off a little, and he could still shoot in combat. So nice. Now, his weapons, they used to have a weird combination of you chose 2 different weapons. You chose either the Bile Sword or Doomsday Bell as one of your 2 choices, and then the other choice you had to make was the Bile Blade and the Plague Flail. Now, I can tell you right now that this attack profile is a good attack profile. Its total output is good. However, when you used to take the most melee version of this guy that you could make, this underperforms. And especially now when it gets nerfed, which his combat weapons themselves did not get nerfed in the old version of the model. The only thing that got nerfed was the amount of attacks for the Nurglings, and now they are sitting at their second best bracket from before. The top bracket used to be 15. They do have auto wounds now, which actually is a big buff to this output. And you might say, well, why would that be so strong? The interesting thing about auto wounds, especially when you don't have a good wound roll, but even when you don't have a good to hit roll, is that if you roll a 6, it's skipping all of this horrible profile here. Now, if this was a 2-up, it would have much less of a meaningful impact. But because this is a 5, it jumps up quite a bit. So even though this is 5 attacks less than the top bracket from before, statistically, this comes out to being more reliable because of the crit auto wound than what it was when this was 5 attacks more. So that's saying something. But I don't know if you're really taking this guy for a melee unit. I mean, he's decent, but he did get a little bit nerfed, especially in the main weapons. Now let's look at the other rules, though. So, okay, once per turn in your movement phase, and this is per army, so if you take multiple Great Unclean Ones, you're not stacking this. You pick a friendly demon unit, so we're finally seeing some evidence of demons and mortals being split into 2 groups here. That started this battle with 3 or more models and has been destroyed to be the target. Roll a die on a 4-up, set up a replacement unit with half rounding up, holier than 12 of this, and outside of 9 of enemy units. This is a fantastic ability, and as far as I'm aware, Nurgle didn't used to have this. It's kind of a summoning effect, but not really. Now, we have to think about what units this would apply to. It has to have 3 or more models in it. So there aren't a ton of, because this is a very hero-focused army, if we're keeping it real. There aren't a whole lot of units that can reinforce up to high enough. Plague Bearers, but, you know, I mean, you can do this once per turn. So that's actually pretty amazing. Like, sometimes this kind of ability, you'd be happy enough to have a once per game. So Plague Bearers, even though, you know, when we look at their Spearhead's warscroll later, you're not going to be all that impressed with it, probably. At the same time, you're still bringing back guys with 2 wounds, and you're bringing back half the unit. So if you had a unit of 20, then you bring back 10 on a 4-up. So, you know, if you, it's your movement phase too, so it's 5 chances per game, and of course you can't do it unless some of these demons are gone already. But at best, like, let's say 5 turns worth, or you had the option of something being dead in every single one of those 5 turns, and a 4-up. So you're getting 2.5 units back if you look at it that way. But one of those being a Plague Bearers unit is not bad. Beasts of Nurgle, I'm pretty sure can't be reinforced to be 3 or more, because the way they used to be, I think, was in singles. Here, let me double check that real quick. Beasts of Nurgle was a single model. You could, you know, triple reinforce them, I guess, back in the day, but now that's not a thing. Or double reinforced to being triple the size, I should say. Plague drones come in units of, let's see, 2 or 3. Let's check this out. They come in 3s. So the plague drones, this is the flies, basically Plague Bearers on flies. These would qualify because they start with 3 or more models. And that's it. Oh no, wait, Nurglings. Let's see, Nurglings, and I'm looking at the old. The old pitch battle profiles. They used to come in groups of 3 as well, so that could be also an option. That said, they could change the MSU size of any of these units on a dime here if they needed to. So there's, at the current moment, there really aren't that many targets, but it's a resurrection mechanic that you get to do 5 times per game, so I wouldn't be complaining about that. Okay, once per turn, this is his rampage. You can, if this unit is damaged, so as in it has less than 20 health, it's not at full health, you could use this rampage to pick up to 3 enemy units in combat with it, and you roll a d3 on a 2+2 amount of mortal damage equal to that roll. Now, what this rule used to do by name, bloated with corruption, was, if I'm not mistaken, a splashback for mortal or for ward rolls of 6s. Yeah, and you'd give splashback disease points, which was handy. Now it's just doing straight up mortal damage. And actually, this rule feels a little bit more like a combination of that ability I just mentioned, plus the Monstrous Rampage they used to have, which was the Mountain of Loathsome Flesh, which on a 2-up, you would do, if you're not bracketed, 4 mortal wounds. So that got nerfed. I still think this is decent. I mean, if you can get into combat with enough enemy units, you're making an impact. And remember, you're giving the disease points anyway. It doesn't work the same way as it used to. So the splashback disease points aren't really that big of a deal. Don't really make any sense anymore. Let's take a look at the spell. It's casting value 7, range of 12, which has lost 2 inches of range. And then you can give out the target of the disease keyword. Now, the problem is, it used to be 14 inch, you draw a line. Everything along that line on a 4-up would get a disease point, which in effect was making it diseased, right? Which means for the rest of the game, unless they healed, they'd at least be rolling every single turn and taking a mortal wound on a 4-up. That said, if we have a lot of ways to hand out this disease keyword, this is pretty strong. So this is kind of, in a weird way, kind of combined with what we saw with the way that bloated with corruption used to be, but not really. So I feel like they kind of just moved the ball around a little bit on this war scroll. I really like this resurrection ability, but unfortunately the units that qualify aren't exactly my favorite units, but I could see in a fly build, maybe you're excited about that. Plague Bearers, Nurglings, who knows what those war scrolls are going to look like officially, but especially the Nurglings, because we haven't seen anything about them. But overall, I mean, the guy's tanky still. He's a 2-caster, so he can cast something else. You know, I think it's cool. It's maybe a little lackluster, but you know, again, a lot of things in the game are getting toned down, and I don't hate it at all. He lost a couple of his extra abilities that he had, that he could do on the different weapons you could take to receive extra summoning points, basically, or that was with the bell, or with the blade. Let's see. Oh yeah, that's the one where he could give himself damage, but then become like a 3-caster. I think some people are going to miss that one, but then like people complaining that a Lord of Change only is a 2-caster, and this guy's also a 2-caster, and then he could have been more. I kind of get how that's not on brand, but anyway, I don't hate this war scroll at all. We just got to see the points. Okay, let's move on to Mr. Sloppity Bilepiper. This guy was kind of a nightmare for a long time, especially as a summoning target, because even if they didn't take him in the list, they could just summon this guy into the game for relatively cheap and then have this horribly negative impact. I think they really nerfed the shit out of this guy. Here's an example of a guy keeping a 4-inch move. Still 5 health, 5 save, 5 up ward. His weapon profile, he lost an attack. But, you know, yeah, otherwise it's the same if I'm not mistaken. So his ability got nerfed again. And it's once per turn army, which means you can't have multiple guys doing this. Every combat phase. You pick one friendly, visible Maggotkin of Nurgle demon unit, holy than 12, used to be 14. And you didn't used to be pick one, it was everyone in the bubble. And then you got to pick an effect that was similar to what we see here. There's some changes. It happened automatically, so it wasn't on a 2+, but at least it's a 2+, as we talked about in the Idneth, when things relying on a 3+ are just pretty rough. I'd say a 2+ is still rough, considering where he used to be, but you can add 1 to wound rolls for the target's attacks, and it's for the rest of the turn, but keep in mind you started in the combat phase, which means it's not impacting shooting. But this isn't really a shooting army, so it doesn't make a huge difference. But you're adding 1 to wound rolls. This is the new one, the one that's been changed. Ward rolls cannot be made for damage points inflicted by the target's combat attacks. Okay. That would be way stronger if we turned off ward rolls for everyone, but it's just for the target, meaning the target of this ability, so that's your friendly unit. And then subtract 1 from hit rolls for attacks made by enemy units that target the target unit. So, yeah, essentially that unit that you picked is a little more protected. This right here used to be that they would do mortal wounds on 6s to wound in addition. And this, back before the recent battle scroll nerf, was that they couldn't make pylons. Or at least they couldn't end any closer to the unit. They could like rotate around its orbit. I think this war scroll's dead, personally, but, you know, if it's cheap enough, I could see it being somewhere. The crazy thing, I mean, he was never a wizard, but I feel like at this point, I need him doing something else to justify being here. And this ability going off on a 2-up and only affecting 1 unit is just nowhere near where it used to be. Again, thinking about things from the perspective of what it used to be is not how we should be looking at this. But let's assume that all things being equal, that the other units don't get nerfed as hard as this. Because we have seen war scrolls that didn't get nerfed as hard as this. Let's put it that way. In these indexes, this one's pretty hardly like very nerfed, and if that's the case with enough of the other units, they didn't get nerfed. I mean, in this book, then I don't know if this guy makes the cut. Is what I'm saying anymore. So it is what it is. The Sloppity had his long time to shine. Who knows? But my current thoughts are that this is not worth taking, unless there's something I'm missing. Okay, let's move on to the Harbinger of Decay. Now, this one got updated already before this, because this new, very lovely model came out at the beginning, if I'm not mistaken, of the Dawnbringer Crusades books. He was one of the 4 Harbingers, and the Harbinger, the named, I guess, Harbinger, if you will, was replacing an older kit. I don't remember entirely. I don't have the war scroll in front of me right now, but because I've got my book sitting next to me, my Nurgle book, but can't look at that war scroll and do a good comparison here. But if I'm not mistaken, the movement of the wheel didn't change at all. These attacks here, he used to. This did get better if I remember the math that I did on this. Got a good bit better. Even if you took, so there was 2 versions. You could take like a bell plus just the Grim Rot Sword. Or you could take not the bell, which the bell had no attack; it was just an ability, and then you had the Plague Scythe. You could take which did most of the actual damage. Now, keep in mind, again, anytime we talk about heroes, is that heroes are not usually the bread and butter of what's doing all the melee damage. So I wouldn't. It's nice to see these things get better. But at the same time, so this I did pull up the thing now. This has got 3 attacks. It used to, the Plague Scythe itself was 2 attacks, 3 minus 2, so that got pulled down a little bit, 3. And then this had didn't have crit mortals. And doing crit mortals when you have a damage characteristic of 3, because all 3 of those go through if you do it to hit of 6, can be pretty impactful. And then the sword that he had was 2 attacks, 3/3 minus 1 D3. So anyway, okay. And then no one really cares about the horse. What he's doing is once per battle, in the enemy hero phase, you can, with a big old range of 24 inches, you can pick 3 enemy units within, and until the start of your next turn. So keep in mind, this is the enemy's hero phase. So if the things play out normally, this will only be for the rest of that turn. But if they double turn you, they're going to be stuck with this for 2 turns. But you subtract 1 from the movement characteristic of plus 1 from the run rolls and charge rolls for all 3 of those units. Now, this used to be a 14-inch range, so it got 10 inches on it. And it wasn't once per battle army, so technically you could have some amount of stacking, at least redundancy, where you could do it in multiple turns for different of these guys, copies of these Harbingers of Decay. But otherwise, the rule did basically the same thing. And it was just a bubble. It wasn't hitting 3. So this is what we're seeing, is there aren't as many bubble effects now. There's more of a fixed amount that you're allowed to hit, a cap that you have on there. And then he's got a spell. His old spell basically subtracted from people's bravery characteristic on the basis of their of the current battle round. Now it's a prayer, and I said spell, but I meant prayer. That's 4 going to 10 if you supercharge it or whatever you want to call it. You pick invisible enemy unit within 12 inches. It used to be 14, and it used to be on a casting value 3 or prayer chanting value. And you subtract twice the current battle rounds number from the target's control score for the rest of the turn. Now, this is the brutal part, because it is a strong effect. But if you were thinking maybe, oh, well, what if it's the end of battle round 2 and I'm subtracting 4 right now, but then it goes into their turn, into battle round 3, and then subtracting 6. That would be really sweet. Well, it just doesn't work that way. You're going to have to magical intervention it again to make it happen. It's only impacting one unit and the max of subtracting 10 from their control score. I wonder if you can go to a negative control score. I don't know if that's a thing or not. That is an interesting question, because what if they only had 9 models worth? It's battle round 5, you subtract 10, they go to -1, and then you don't have anyone standing on it. Do you automatically take it? I wonder if there's a minimum that can be. That's kind of interesting. But anyway, if you do get the supercharged version of it, all enemy units within 12 inches of this unit are affected instead of just 1. Yeah, so, and then he used to have a way to turn off command abilities. That's gone, so that's pretty rough for the combat phase and battle shock phase. He's got a 5-up ward too, but then again, all of them have it. I mean, he's tanky, even tankier than a stereotypical Nurgle model, especially for a mounted hero. He's a little fast. This is kind of Nurgle's version of fast. I like him. I think there's some amount of tech here. We're going to really have to see how much this type of ability plays a big role in the game. Keep in mind the objectives are a lot smaller, so your control scores, the amount of models you can get on those objectives is going to be different than we're used to. So I think this is a wait and see, but I think there's some use there. Trying to get greedy and get all 10 of these points up is tough when he's only a 1-level priest, and that's what most priests are going to be anyway. I'm curious, but I'm also curious because Nurgle didn't used to have a prayer lore, like a prayer scripture. So I'm hoping maybe that every faction that's got a priest in it also has a prayer lore, so he's got some other options. Because this is a good ability, but there's definitely some turns where this does nothing. And I still think we're not 100% sure if there's a generic set of prayers and spells that everyone knows, though I wouldn't be surprised if we kept the heals and blesses of the world still around. Or was it smite? That's what it was, smite and bless. Anyway. All right, let's move on. This is our only unit that we see a full regular war scroll for, Putrid Blightkings. So these guys are mortals, as just like the last guy. This unit was always a weird one because they come in 5s, if I'm not mistaken, and they were extremely tanky. They used to have 4 health, and now they've been nerfed down to 3, but they got +1 save. And remember, if you all defense them, they're going to a 2+ save, which is a huge increase. So, in a certain sense, I did the math on this. I think they actually, with their 5-up ward, are better against no rend than they used to be, and they're the same against the same amount, or against -1 rend. That's as what they used to be. That said, I'm not taking into account that the champion. Remember, we used to have specific rules for every unit that had a champion, musician, or standard bearer. Sometimes we see the same kind of rules, usually the champion having +1 attack. That's still there. But now every single musician and standard bearer do the same thing. 1 adding to the control score and 1 adding to a die to when you rally. But that takes a lot of the flavor out of some of these units that had some secret sauce built in. And their thing was, just like the Plague Bearers, they had a musician role that made people reroll battle shock rolls for enemy units within 6. And then the the champion was weird because he bumped his wounds characteristic up to 5, which meant he had a control score of 2 functionally. So they actually had 1 extra wound in the unit. But anyway, I digress. So that's gone, but they're still tanky for sure. If we look at their profile here, they used to have 5 attacks, so that got worse. But the rest of the profile was the same. So they lost 20% of their output per model. Instead, what they've got is this new rule to add 3 to its unit's control score while each model in this unit is contesting an objective you control. I don't remember the exact wording of the Liberators, but it was something about in friendly territory, I think. Um, Now, this is easy to miss. It's not that they're just the unit is contesting an objective you control, but each model in the unit has to be contesting it. So if you take a big block of 10 of these guys, and they're not on small bases, there's a chance that they're not all going to be standing on it, and then you're not actually getting this. That said, they're probably a big enough unit that they're taking up enough of the objective to lock it out enough. So maybe it's a trade. Remember, this is the type of wording, because it's the control score, that say you've got 10 guys in this unit, then it's 10 times 1 plus 3, so it's 13. So I don't know how impactful that is, but maybe you can couple it with what we just saw of the this guy, Harbinger of Decay, and then subtracting the opponent's amount of control score. Maybe that's something meaningful. So I guess that's the role these guys are playing, is like objective dudes that are tanky. And, you know, there's nothing to complain about a 3-up save, for sure, with a 5-up ward. But, you know, they're just a little bit nerfed in a certain sense. Against high Ren, they're nerfed, and their attacks a little bit. Okay, so that's the whole regular stuff. And then if we scoot over here to the Plague Bearers, Spearhead War Scroll, again, you know, always a warning with the Spearhead War Scrolls is that we can't read too much into these because they might have extra abilities. But the wheel is the same. This passive ability got buffed because it used to be subtract 1 from hit rolls for shooting attacks that target this unit if the unit had 5 or more models. But now this unit has no minimum on that, so they're always getting -1 to be shot at. And then their War Scroll got a tiny bit buffed. 1 attack for a battle line unit is real rough, hitting on 4s, then 3s, no Ren 1, but they are doing mortals on 6s now, which is something. So it puts out just the slightest bit more output, just the slightest bit. But you have to get those 6s. And then they lost, at least on this War Scroll, the Spearhead version of it, they lost their coming back. If you take a battle shock test and then you roll 1, you bring some back, which was flavorful and cool, kept them alive a little bit longer. But, you know, I don't know. I don't have much to say about this unit, really. So, in all, I feel like this is kind of an underwhelming presentation. But like I said before, this army is an army that is just, like, low-key good at doing what it does. Now, that's not to say that they were always strong before the 3rd edition book came out. But the army tends to have resilience, which is kind of its thing, right? And it's really going to be a question of how strong is this big battle trait for all the disease points, just constantly giving up those mortal wounds, which has traditionally had a big impact. And then what are the rest of the buff units going to look like? I don't feel like we've seen... I mean, the strongest War Scroll we've seen here really is the Great Unclean One, not just because he's got a lot of stuff going on, but I think he actually has the most tech. And maybe the Harbinger of Decay, maybe. But anyway, what are you guys thinking? Are you guys excited about Nurgle stuff coming up? Are you looking forward to diving in with all the pestilence and getting filthy with us? I don't know. I don't know what the consensus is on this one. I know that I'm kind of on the other side of the coin from a lot of the people I've seen online over Idneth and some of my friends even. But, you know, so let us know in the comments. Let us know. Come join the Discord and let us know what you think. Anyway, guys, we're going to have Sons of Behemoth, the big old Gargant boys, tomorrow. I'm real curious about that one because they only have so many War Scrolls. I don't know how much they're going to be able to show. I'm assuming 1 big, 1 little, and maybe some traits. But we will see. In the meantime, guys, Ryan out.